Deep beneath the surface, where the world above had crumbled into chaos, a secret bunker stood as humanity's last hope. It had been built long before the world fell into disarray, a safe haven hidden beneath miles of earth, designed to withstand any disaster, though no one had predicted the rise of the undead. The once distant threat had now become a daily nightmare. The bunker's thick, reinforced walls were built to endure both nuclear and biological warfare, but nothing could prepare its occupants for what they were about to face. Inside, the lights flickered in the sterile halls, the hum of the generators providing a constant reminder of the outside world's horrors. The survivors, a group of military personnel, scientists, and civilians, had been living in this underground haven for months, trying to stay hidden from the growing horde of zombies above. But they weren't safe. The news from the surface was grim. The infection was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and supplies were running low. Tensions were rising inside the bunker, too. The promise of safety had begun to feel like a cage. Major Callahan, the leader of the survivors, paced the command center, his eyes scanning the outdated monitors that displayed static images of the world above. He had always been a man of action, a problem solver, but now he found himself feeling helpless. The bunker's security system was airtight, but he knew that wouldn't stop the zombies forever. They were relentless, a growing wave of destruction, and soon enough, they would find a way inside. "We can't stay down here forever," Callahan muttered to himself. His fingers drummed on the cold surface of the desk as he stared at the small, flickering map on the screen. The underground facility had once been a well-guarded secret, but now, it was a prison. He had to make a decision. Should they stay and wait for the inevitable? Or should they risk venturing back to the surface in search of supplies and a way to fight back? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was, they couldn't just sit idly by. Major Callahan had one weapon left, humanity's secret weapon. Dr. Emery, the bunker's lead scientist, had been working in secret for weeks. She'd developed a serum, a potential cure, or at least a way to slow the infection. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best chance. If they could find a way to get it to the surface, to the remaining cities, it might be humanity's only hope. But that was a big if. Dr. Emery had approached Callahan that morning with a proposal. "We need to take the fight to them, Major. The zombies are relentless, but we have the advantage underground. We have the element of surprise, the weapons, and the knowledge they don't. It's time to turn the tables." Callahan had hesitated. The idea of going up against the undead, especially with a serum that was untested in the field, was risky. But if they didn't try, the world would be lost. He knew that the bunker wasn't an endless refuge, it was just a temporary solution. "I'll gather a team," he said grimly. "We'll move out at first light." As the survivors gathered in the briefing room, nerves were high. Everyone knew what was at stake. For some, it was a chance at redemption, for others, it was simply survival. But one thing was certain, once they left the safety of the bunker, there would be no turning back. Sergeant Walker, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his cheek, checked his gear. His face was stoic, but his eyes betrayed a sense of dread. "We're not just fighting the undead up there," he muttered to Callahan. "There are people who've turned, too. The infected, they're more dangerous than any zombie." Callahan nodded, acknowledging the point. The infection had evolved. It wasn't just the mindless hordes anymore, there were people who had succumbed to the virus and were now out there, more cunning, more brutal, and far more deadly. The group moved silently to the armory, their boots echoing through the cold concrete corridors. They were armed to the teeth, every survivor knowing that this could be their last mission. The weapons, stored in heavy cases, gleamed under the dim lights. They had everything from high-powered rifles to makeshift explosives, anything to give them an edge against the growing threat above. As the final preparations were made, the air in the bunker grew thick with tension. Everyone knew that the journey ahead would be dangerous, but they also knew that it was the only chance they had. They were humanity's last line of defense. "We move out in 10 minutes, Major Callahan announced, his voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. Outside, the battle was about to begin. To be continued. The team, fully armed and ready for the uncharted horrors of the surface world, made their way to the bunker's hidden elevator shaft. The massive metal doors groaned as they opened, revealing a rickety system of stairs that led up to the surface. The air in the elevator shaft was thick with dust, the scent of old machinery mingling with a faint metallic tang. It was as if the world above had forgotten them, forgotten the battles fought before the zombie apocalypse tore the world apart. Major Callahan led the way, his boots echoing ominously as they climbed. Behind him, Dr. Emery walked cautiously, carrying a small, nondescript vial, the serum that could potentially turn the tide. The rest of the team followed, moving in near silence, their eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Even though the bunker had been their refuge, no one could deny the ever-present sense of unease. Reaching the surface would be the hardest part. The world outside had become a wasteland, the remnants of civilization barely visible through the thick clouds of smoke and ash. The city, once a thriving metropolis, was now a deserted ruin, overrun by the undead. Once the elevator doors opened to the surface, the team found themselves in a desolate landscape. The sky above was a dull gray, the sun hidden behind a constant layer of thick clouds. Fires still burned in the distance, and the sound of distant groaning filled the air, a stark reminder that the undead were never far away. "Keep your wits about you," Callahan ordered, his voice low but commanding. "We move fast, we move smart." The group moved quickly, using the ruins for cover as they made their way toward the designated extraction point. Callahan had formulated a plan. They'd enter the abandoned city, collect any supplies they could, and then make their way to a nearby military outpost, if any remained standing. The outpost was one of the last known safe zones, though no communication had come from it in weeks. It could either be their salvation or their doom. They approached the outskirts of the city, the looming structures casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. Callahan could feel the tension in the air, there was something wrong. The city was eerily quiet, too quiet. The zombies should have been everywhere by now, roaming the streets in search of fresh prey, but there was an unnatural stillness. Dr. Emery whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't like this. It's too quiet." "Where are they?" Callahan's eyes narrowed. "Stay sharp. It's probably a trap." The group advanced cautiously, staying close to the buildings, their weapons at the ready. They moved with military precision, each member covering the other. Every corner they turned, every alley they passed, felt like a death trap. It wasn't the zombies they were worried about, the infected humans were just as dangerous, if not more so. They reached a crumbling intersection, where the remains of an old gas station sat, its windows shattered and the pumps long since drained. Callahan motioned for a halt. There was a narrow alleyway to the left that led deeper into the city. This was the shortest route to the outpost, but it also looked like it hadn't been traversed in years. "Everyone stay quiet. No unnecessary movement," Callahan ordered. As they moved down the alley, a sound broke the silence, a low, guttural growl that echoed off the walls. Everyone froze. The hairs on the back of Callahan's neck stood up. He signaled for the team to spread out, scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. Then, without warning, a figure lunged from the shadows. It wasn't a zombie. At least, not entirely. The creature had the twisted, decayed features of the undead, but its movements were sharp, calculated. Its eyes, wild with hunger, fixed on the group as it let out a shrill screech that sent chills down their spines. "Incoming!" Sergeant Walker yelled, raising his rifle and firing. But it was too late. More figures, infected humans with a grotesque blend of strength and speed, emerged from the darkness, surrounding the team. They were not just zombies, they were predators, faster and more cunning, each one seemingly more intelligent than the last. Callahan's heart raced. He had known there were rumors of evolved zombies, infected humans who retained some semblance of their former selves. But seeing it in the flesh, hearing the screams of the infected, made it all too real. "We need to fall back," Callahan shouted, signaling for retreat. The group moved quickly, but the infected were relentless, pushing them deeper into the maze of broken buildings. With every step, it felt like the walls were closing in. Their chances of survival were slipping through their fingers. As the team fought to hold their ground, Callahan realized just how desperate the situation had become. The world they knew was gone, and they were left to face the monsters it had created. This was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a battle for humanity's future. To be continued. The sound of pounding footsteps echoed in the narrow alley as the team sprinted, their breaths ragged with the effort to escape the rapidly closing circle of infected. Callahan's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The creatures that had ambushed them were relentless, but they weren't just mindless undead, they had evolved, becoming faster, smarter, and more vicious. "We've got to keep moving," Sergeant Walker barked, his rifle raised and ready as they turned a corner, putting more distance between themselves and the infected. But the danger wasn't behind them, it was all around them. The city had once been a thriving hub of human life, but now, it was a deadly labyrinth filled with shadows and things far worse than what they had left behind in the bunker. The streets, cracked and littered with the remains of a once thriving society, had become hunting grounds. The twisted, evolved zombies seemed to be everywhere, lurking in every corner, waiting for a moment to strike. "We need to find higher ground," Dr. Emery suggested, her voice tight with fear but still clear. "The infected can't climb as well as we can." Callahan nodded in agreement. "Good idea. Move toward that building over there." He pointed to a tall, partially collapsed skyscraper in the distance. It loomed ominously against the gray sky, the skeleton of what used to be a symbol of human achievement. The structure still seemed intact enough to offer a potential advantage. With no time to waste, the team pushed forward, sprinting through the wreckage of the city, avoiding open spaces where the infected could easily corner them. The closer they got to the skyscraper, the more the tension mounted. They knew that every step could be their last. As they approached the building's entrance, Callahan heard the unmistakable sound of growling in the distance. This time, it wasn't just one or two infected, it sounded like an entire horde. He signaled for the group to stop and take cover behind a nearby wrecked vehicle. "Hold your positions," he whispered, raising his binoculars to scan the area. Through the shattered glass of a nearby window, he could see a group of the evolved zombies patrolling the entrance of the skyscraper. "We can't go through the front," Callahan muttered, lowering the binoculars. "We'll have to find another way in." Dr. Emery, ever the scientist, had already been studying the building's layout from the schematics they'd found in the bunker. She pointed to a side entrance, partially hidden behind a wall of debris. "There's a maintenance door over there. It should still be intact." Callahan nodded. "Let's move." They made their way to the side of the building, trying their best to stay out of sight. Each step felt like a lifetime, each creaking of metal or shift of debris threatening to expose their position. As they reached the maintenance door, Sergeant Walker tried the handle. It was locked, but the lock wasn't reinforced, and with a few well-placed hits, the door gave way, allowing them entry. The team hurried inside, and once they were safe, they took a moment to catch their breath. The dim light filtering in through the cracked walls offered little comfort, but it was better than the chaos outside. For a moment, it seemed like they had finally found a brief respite from the horrors that had been stalking them. But the stillness was short-lived. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. It was too late to hide, too late to retreat. The team quickly drew their weapons, preparing for another fight. "They're here," Sergeant Walker growled. "Get ready." As the first of the evolved zombies rounded the corner, Callahan's mind raced. They couldn't afford to get bogged down in a fight here, they had to push forward, get to the heart of the building, and secure a place to regroup. He knew that the military outpost was only a few miles away, but it might as well have been 100. The first zombie lunged at them, moving far faster than any normal zombie. Its twisted, decayed face showed no sign of human resemblance. It was a grotesque parody of life, driven purely by hunger and rage. Callahan fired first, hitting the creature square in the chest, but it barely flinched. Walker followed with a shot to the head, and this time, the creature went down. But more were coming. "Fall back!" Callahan shouted, grabbing Dr. Emery by the arm and pulling her toward the deeper interior of the building. "We need to get to the roof." The group moved quickly, ducking into an abandoned stairwell that led up. The sound of the undead grew louder, their inhuman growls and shrieks echoing through the narrow space. As they ascended the stairs, Callahan's mind was working overdrive. The roof would give them the high ground they needed, but it would also put them in the open, vulnerable to the horrors below. Just a little farther, he muttered to himself, more for his own reassurance than anything else. When they finally reached the top, they were greeted by a terrifying sight. The roof was not as empty as they had hoped. The zombies had already gathered, and they weren't alone. There were other survivors, human scavengers, fighting back with everything they had. Callahan's eyes narrowed. These weren't the people they had been hoping to find. This was another enemy to face. "Stay sharp," he warned the group. "We're not alone up here." The roof of the skyscraper had once been a sanctuary for those seeking a view of the world below. Now, it had become a battleground. The sky was thick with ash, the air heavy and suffocating. Callahan's eyes scanned the scene: shattered rooftops, discarded weapons, and, worst of all, the horde of zombies milling around. But what truly stood out were the humans. A ragtag group of survivors, armed with makeshift weapons, fought off the zombies with a desperate fury. They were trapped, just like Callahan's team, with no way out. But instead of cooperating, they were determined to hold their ground, fighting for a place that wasn't even guaranteed to be safe. "Stay alert," Callahan muttered to his team as they crept closer to the edge of the building. The sound of gunfire rang out, followed by the screams of the survivors, and Callahan's heart sank. They didn't have the luxury of fighting the undead and humans at the same time. They needed to find a way to move through this chaos. Walker was the first to break the silence. "Should we help them?" he asked, his rifle aimed at a group of zombies closing in on a lone survivor. His finger twitched, ready to fire. Callahan looked at the scene for a moment, weighing his options. "We don't have time to get involved with their problems. We need to move fast." Dr. Emery, who had been watching the survivors from a distance, frowned. "But they're just as much at risk as we are. If we don't help them, they'll be overrun." Callahan shook his head. "Our mission is to get to the military outpost and gather more supplies. We can't waste time saving people who might not even make it. But if we do nothing, we might be next," Dr. Emery insisted, a note of urgency in her voice. "We're not alone in this fight. We need to stand together." Before Callahan could respond, a sudden cry for help broke through the noise of battle. A survivor was cornered by a group of zombies, their gnarled hands reaching for the man's throat. His pleas for mercy echoed across the rooftop. "Damn it!" Callahan swore, his resolve cracking. "All right, we help them, but we do it fast. Walker, cover me." The group rushed toward the struggling survivor, dodging between fallen debris and fire-scorched barricades. Callahan's heart raced as he saw the horde closing in on their position. There was no time to waste. Walker fired from behind, picking off a few of the zombies with deadly accuracy, while Callahan and Dr. Emery moved in to save the survivor. The man, covered in blood, was struggling against the swarm of undead, but he was losing the fight. Callahan grabbed his arm, pulling him out of the way just as one of the zombies lunged for his throat. With a swift motion, Callahan drove a knife into its skull, the creature dropping to the ground with a sickening thud. "Get up!" Callahan shouted at the survivor, dragging him toward safety. The survivor looked up, eyes wide with fear, but he didn't hesitate to follow. The team moved as one, pushing through the zombies, shooting when necessary but avoiding unnecessary conflict. They couldn't afford to be bogged down by another fight. Once they were a safe distance away, the survivor collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. "Thank you," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "I thought I was done for." Callahan didn't reply at first, scanning the battlefield. He had done his duty, but he wasn't about to get distracted. The zombies were still coming, and the survivors on the rooftop would only delay their mission. Time was running out. "We can't stay here," Callahan said, turning back to the group. "The outpost is still our goal." "You're welcome, but we can't risk losing any more time." The survivor nodded, wiping blood from his face. "You're right. I don't even know if the outpost is still standing, but it's better than this place." "I'll come with you." Dr. Emery hesitated. "Are you sure? We don't have much left in terms of supplies, and we're already spread thin." The survivor, whose name turned out to be Mark, glanced over his shoulder at the chaos behind them. "What choice do I have? This place is a death trap. At least if I stick with you, I've got a chance." Callahan reluctantly nodded. "Fine. But stay out of the way. You'll have to earn your keep." Mark gave a quick nod, his eyes hardened with determination. "I get it." With the new addition to their team, they set off across the rooftop, moving swiftly toward the stairwell that led to the lower floors. The sound of the battle below them raged on, but their focus remained fixed on their goal, the military outpost. But as they reached the door to the stairwell, another voice echoed through the air. "Where are you going?" The voice was harsh, filled with suspicion. Callahan froze, his hand on the door handle. He motioned for the team to stop, his eyes scanning the rooftop for the source of the voice. Then, from behind a crumbled wall, a figure emerged, a man dressed in tattered military gear, his face smeared with dirt and blood. "We don't take kindly to people trying to leave," the man continued, his tone cold and unforgiving. "You're not going anywhere." The tension in the air was palpable. Callahan's hand tightened around his weapon as he assessed the situation. There were more survivors hidden around the corner, watching them, waiting for a move. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for control. To be continued. The man standing before them, dressed in military fatigues and looking as if he had seen far too many battles, was clearly a leader of the rooftop survivors. He was older than Callahan, with sharp eyes that assessed every person in the group, calculating threats and opportunities. Behind him, the shadows of several other survivors shifted, their weapons at the ready. "Who are you?" Callahan demanded, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising tension. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. Not with the zombies closing in, the stakes higher than ever. The man's gaze shifted from Callahan to Walker, then to Dr. Emery. "Doesn't matter who I am," the man said, his voice gruff. "What matters is you've been brought here, and that means you follow the rules of the roof. If you want to survive, you do what I say." Callahan could feel the weight of the man's words hanging in the air, a warning, but also an invitation. But Callahan wasn't one to be easily controlled. His gaze never wavered. "We're not here to make friends," Callahan replied evenly. "We're trying to get to the military outpost. It's a hell of a lot safer than sticking around here, especially with the infected closing in." The man scoffed, stepping closer, his boots crunching on the debris-covered rooftop. "The outpost? You think they're gonna let you in there, with all the chaos going on? It's a pipe dream. That's why we've been holding this position, we're not giving it up to some outsiders." Mark, the survivor Callahan had saved earlier, stepped forward. "You can't be serious. If you keep fighting, you'll end up just like those things out there." He pointed toward the horde of zombies gathering on the edge of the rooftop. "We all have to work together if we want to get through this." The man's eyes narrowed at Mark, his expression darkening. "You don't get to tell me what to do, newcomer. We've held this rooftop for weeks. The infected haven't gotten in. We control this area. And now, you're telling me how to run things?" The tension in the air was thick, and Callahan's hand instinctively moved to the handle of his weapon. The last thing he needed right now was a fight with other survivors, especially over something as trivial as control. But before the situation could escalate any further, a guttural roar echoed across the rooftop, cutting through the standoff like a knife. Callahan's head snapped toward the sound. A massive group of zombies had begun to pour through the stairwell entrance at the far side of the roof. They had made their way inside, unaware of the humans hiding behind the structure's broken walls. The survivors in front of Callahan quickly scattered, scrambling for cover and readying their weapons. "This isn't the time," Walker shouted, raising his rifle as he moved into position. "The undead are on the move." For a brief moment, everything seemed to stand still. The threat of the undead was enough to silence the dispute, and in that instant, survival instinct took over. Callahan didn't wait for permission. He turned to his team, motioning for them to fall into line. "Everyone, move. Now!" Callahan barked. The survivors on the roof followed suit, their hesitation evaporating as they realized the greater threat was the undead, not each other. The military man was the first to lead his group toward the nearest barricade, while Callahan's team moved swiftly, weaving through the horde of infected that was growing larger by the second. It was chaos. Gunfire erupted, cutting through the air as both groups of survivors fought back against the swarm of zombies descending upon them. The scent of burning flesh, both human and undead, filled the air as bodies were ripped apart in the frenzied melee. Callahan shot 2 zombies in quick succession, but his eyes remained locked on the entrance, where the majority of the undead were coming from. He could see the dark silhouettes of the zombies moving in the stairwell, their twisted forms stumbling into the open. "We can't hold them off forever," Dr. Emery shouted, her voice strained with panic. She fired a few shots, but the zombies kept coming. Mark, still breathing heavily, grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it wildly, taking down 2 zombies in one fluid motion. "We need a plan." "There's no time for plans," Callahan growled, his focus on the battlefield. "Just keep fighting." But amidst the madness, Callahan's mind raced. They couldn't stay on the roof forever. The barricades would eventually fall, and even if they managed to clear the zombies here, they would only be moving from one death trap to another. Their best chance for survival lay in reaching the military outpost, if it was still intact. "Walker, Dr. Emery," Callahan shouted above the chaos. "We need to move. Find a way to get down to the lower levels, now." Walker fired a few more shots to cover them, then nodded. "Understood. Let's go." The group began retreating, back toward the maintenance door they had originally entered from. Behind them, the rooftop battle raged on as more infected poured in, but there was no time to dwell on the fight. They had to move forward. As they reached the door, Callahan's heart was pounding in his chest. The sound of zombies breaking through the barricades was deafening now, but they had no choice but to press on. With a final glance over his shoulder, Callahan gave the order. "Let's move, now." One by one, the survivors entered the stairwell, pushing their way down into the depths of the building. The sound of the battle above them grew muffled as they descended, but the danger was far from over. There were still other levels to be navigated, and the infected could be anywhere. But one thing was certain, whatever awaited them, they would face it together. The darkness of the stairwell closed in around Callahan and his group. The hum of distant gunfire and screams from the rooftop grew faint as they descended into the bowels of the building. The smell of smoke and decaying bodies lingered in the air, and the tension in the narrow stairwell was palpable. Each step they took felt heavier, like they were descending into a deeper, more dangerous hell. "Stay sharp," Callahan whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. He was leading the group down, eyes constantly scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, and with each turn, they seemed to move further away from hope and closer to danger. Dr. Emery was close behind, her medical pack slung over her shoulder. She had been quiet since the rooftop battle, her expression grim. Callahan knew she was thinking about their dwindling supplies, the uncertainty of what they might find in the depths of the building. Mark, who had stuck with the group since Callahan had saved him, moved cautiously, his eyes darting to every corner. His hands shook slightly as he gripped a crowbar, his weapon of choice. "Do you think the outpost is still intact?" he asked, his voice strained with uncertainty. Callahan didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure. The outpost had been their last hope, but the longer they traveled, the more it seemed like a distant dream. But he couldn't let the others lose hope. "We won't know until we get there," he said finally, his voice steady. "But we'll get there. We have to." The group continued down the stairs in silence, their footsteps the only sound in the suffocating quiet. But then, just as Callahan was beginning to think they had made it past the worst of it, a faint noise echoed up from below. It was a low, guttural growl, too deep and resonant to be just another zombie. "Did you hear that?" Walker asked, his hand tightening around his rifle. Callahan held up a hand to stop them. "Stay quiet." The growl came again, louder this time. It was closer, far too close. Dr. Emery swallowed nervously, her hand instinctively moving to the medical kit at her side. "What is that?" "Not sure," Callahan muttered. "But I don't like it." Walker crouched down, his rifle ready, his eyes narrowing in the direction of the sound. The growls were joined by the sound of something dragging along the ground, a wet scraping noise that made the hair on Callahan's neck stand on end. "Something's coming," Walker whispered, his voice tight with concern. The group moved slowly down the stairs, every step calculated and measured. The darkness below seemed to thicken, and the growl grew louder, sharper. They were almost to the bottom level now, where the military outpost was supposed to be. But the closer they got, the more ominous the noise became. Then, they saw it. A figure, no, a creature, emerged from the shadows. It wasn't a zombie. It wasn't human, either. Its twisted body was covered in mottled, patchy skin, and its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its eyes were glowing faintly in the dark, like a predator's waiting to strike. It dragged itself toward them, its movements jerky, unnervingly fast for something so grotesque. "It's one of them," Dr. Emery whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a mutation. Something worse than a zombie." Callahan's stomach churned. He had seen a lot of horrors in his time, but this was something new. Something even more terrifying than the mindless zombies they had been fighting. "Take it down," Callahan ordered, his voice low but firm. Walker didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The first shot rang out, hitting the creature in the chest. It staggered back, but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed off the walls, shaking the very foundation of the building. The creature charged, its claws reaching for Walker. He fired again, but the thing was too fast. It slashed at his arm, sending him stumbling back in pain. "Walker!" Dr. Emery screamed. Without thinking, Callahan rushed forward, pushing past Walker. He slammed his combat knife into the creature's side, aiming for the weak spot he had spotted earlier. But the creature didn't go down. It roared in agony, thrashing wildly as it fought back. "Hold it still!" Callahan shouted. Mark lunged forward, swinging his crowbar at the creature. He managed to land a blow to its head, causing it to stagger, but it was still far from defeated. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto Mark, and it hissed. But just as it was about to strike, Walker regained his footing. He raised his rifle and fired one final shot, aiming for the creature's head. The bullet hit its target, and the creature collapsed with a sickening thud. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Callahan stood over the creature's body, breathing heavily, his heart still racing from the adrenaline. "Is it dead?" Mark asked, his voice strained. Callahan knelt down, checking for any signs of life. The creature's body was still, its glowing eyes dimming. "For now," Callahan muttered. "But that's not the only one. There will be more." The group stood in tense silence, the weight of their situation sinking in. Whatever they had hoped to find at the military outpost, it was clear now that it wouldn't be easy. They had just fought off one of the mutated creatures, and there were more out there. "Let's move," Callahan said, standing up. "We've got to keep going." With no time to waste, they pushed forward, deeper into the dark, unknown depths of the building, the ever-present danger of the undead and the mutated creatures hanging over them like a dark cloud. To be continued. The air grew colder as Callahan and his group continued to make their way deeper into the building. The stairwell had ended in a long, dimly lit corridor, and the sense of unease hung heavier with each step. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, a constant reminder of their isolation. The once secure military outpost they sought felt more like a distant myth than a tangible hope. With every passing minute, it seemed further and further away. Callahan's thoughts were racing. The creature they had just fought off was an anomaly, something new, a terrifying hybrid of zombie and something else, something even worse. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were dealing with something far more sinister. The government, the military, none of it made sense anymore. What had they unleashed, and could they even stop it? Walker, despite his injuries, kept close to the group, his weapon still tightly gripped. His face was pale, a mixture of pain and adrenaline making his eyes dart constantly around their surroundings. "What now?" he asked, his voice strained. Callahan took a deep breath, glancing at the others. Dr. Emery's face was grim, her medical expertise telling her the group couldn't afford to keep fighting mutations like the one they had just encountered. Mark, too, seemed to be lost in thought, his gaze constantly flicking back toward the corridor behind them, expecting more mutated creatures to appear at any moment. "We keep going," Callahan said, his voice firm but weary. "We don't stop. We're close, I can feel it." The group moved cautiously forward, their senses heightened, alert to every noise, every shift in the air. They had to be prepared for anything. The military outpost was close, but the closer they got, the more uncertain things seemed. As they passed through several doors, each leading to dark, abandoned hallways, they found signs of a previous life, crates of supplies, scattered documents, and overturned furniture. But there was no sign of the people who had once worked here. No signs of the military personnel who had been stationed here. It was as if they had vanished, leaving only remnants behind. Finally, they reached a heavy metal door at the end of the corridor, its surface marked with faded military insignia. The door looked sturdy, as though it had been designed to withstand anything. But as Callahan reached for the handle, a low, rumbling growl came from behind the door, chilling him to the core. The sound was unmistakable, the same guttural, bone-chilling growl they had heard earlier, just before the mutation had attacked. "Not again," Mark muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on his crowbar. Callahan paused, considering their options. The last thing they needed was to walk into another battle without a plan. But time was running out. They had to move forward. "Get ready," he ordered. "On my signal, we'll push through the door." Dr. Emery shifted nervously but nodded, her hand still on her medical kit. Walker looked to Callahan, his expression serious. "I'll go first," Walker said, stepping forward with his rifle raised. Callahan gave him a brief nod. "Make sure you clear the area." With a deep breath, Walker gripped the door handle and pushed it open with one swift motion. Immediately, the growl grew louder, the sound echoing from somewhere deep within the room. But there was no turning back now. The door swung open, revealing a vast, darkened chamber. Rows of metal filing cabinets and scattered debris littered the floor, and broken lights flickered overhead. It was clear the room had been abandoned in haste. Papers and files were strewn across the ground, as if someone had been interrupted mid-operation. But the growls weren't coming from the piles of debris, they were coming from the far side of the room, beyond a set of heavy steel doors that seemed to lead deeper into the complex. "Stay alert," Callahan murmured. They moved cautiously into the room, scanning every corner. The growls were louder now, unmistakable. Whatever was beyond the steel doors, it was close. Too close. Walker gestured toward the doors. "That's where it's coming from." "Let's go," Callahan urged, motioning for them to move forward. They reached the steel doors, which were locked tight, but the noise on the other side of them was deafening now. There was no mistake. Whatever was behind them wasn't just a few zombies. It sounded like an entire horde, combined with something more terrifying. Something that made the hair on the back of Callahan's neck stand on end. "We need to get through this," Dr. Emery said, her voice low but firm. She pulled out a small tool from her medical pack, something she had fashioned to be used for breaking into secured areas. Callahan watched as she worked quickly, her fingers nimble despite the pressure. The rest of the group stood at the ready, their weapons raised, prepared for whatever might come through those doors. But as Dr. Emery clicked the final piece into place, something shifted. The sound from the other side of the door stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The hairs on Callahan's arms prickled. "Something's not right," Walker said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could respond, the steel doors suddenly creaked open. But instead of the horde they were expecting, the room beyond revealed something far worse: rows of cages, each one filled with twisted, mutated creatures. Some of them were human, their bodies contorted into unnatural shapes, their faces frozen in an expression of perpetual agony. "They were experimenting on them," Mark muttered, his voice shaking with disbelief. Callahan's stomach churned at the sight. This wasn't just a military outpost. It was a lab, a place where they had been creating something far more dangerous than just zombies. The creatures in the cages weren't mindless, they were intelligent, mutated beyond recognition, and far more terrifying than any horde they had ever faced. The growls started again, but this time, it wasn't just one or two creatures. The entire room seemed to come alive, the mutated things in their cages snarling and clawing at the bars. Some of them seemed to be watching the survivors with intelligence in their eyes, as if understanding their presence. "We've got to get out of here," Callahan said urgently. But the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. The door slamming shut behind them sent a shockwave of panic through the group. The once silent chamber now roared with the cacophony of snarls, growls, and the rattling of metal as the mutated creatures began to claw at their cages. Callahan's heart raced. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a race against time to escape a nightmare that was evolving faster than they could comprehend. "Move!" Callahan barked. "Get to cover, now!" The group scattered, taking shelter behind large piles of debris and the remnants of broken equipment. The chamber, once a sterile, clinical lab, had now become a trap. Callahan's eyes darted from cage to cage, watching as the creatures within began to shift, their movements jerky but purposeful, as if they were testing the boundaries of their enclosures. Some were pacing back and forth, while others, larger and more terrifying, stared at the group, their glowing eyes locked on them with an intelligence that chilled him to the bone. "Callahan, what now?" Walker shouted from behind cover, his rifle aimed at the nearest cage, ready to fire. "We need to get to those control panels," Callahan said, motioning to a series of desks along the far wall. "We can lock down this area, make sure nothing gets out." Dr. Emery glanced toward the control panels, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. "We can try, but I'm not sure how much time we have. These things are evolving. They're not just mindless zombies anymore. They're something else." Callahan nodded grimly. He had seen the change in them, the subtle but terrifying intelligence. It was as if the virus had altered the very fabric of what made them human, creating something new and far more dangerous. Something that couldn't be controlled or predicted. "We don't have a choice," Callahan replied. "We either lock them down, or they break free. Either way, we're fighting for our lives." With their weapons raised and eyes constantly scanning the room, they made their way toward the control panels. The creatures in the cages reacted immediately, their growls turning to hisses as they began to claw at the bars with a renewed fury. The sound was deafening, but it only fueled the urgency of their mission. Each step felt like an eternity, the pressure mounting as the air thickened with the scent of fear and sweat. Callahan reached the first control panel, his fingers trembling as he punched in the codes. The screen flickered, but it didn't respond. He slammed his fist against it in frustration. "Come on. They're getting smarter," Dr. Emery said, her voice tight with panic. "I think they can sense us. They're learning." At that moment, a deafening crash echoed through the room as one of the larger creatures managed to break through its cage. It was massive, its limbs twisted and deformed, its eyes glowing a sinister red. It roared as it charged toward them, faster than anything Callahan had ever seen. "Take it down!" Callahan shouted, his hand grabbing for his pistol. Walker fired first, his shots ringing out one after the other, but the creature didn't slow down. Instead, it barreled forward with terrifying speed, its claws slashing the air as it charged at Dr. Emery. "Get down!" Callahan yelled, pushing her out of the way just in time. He shot at the creature, his aim shaky but desperate. A bullet struck its side, but it barely reacted. Mark swung his crowbar, aiming for the creature's head. He landed a solid blow, but the creature shook it off like it was nothing. It was getting stronger, more resilient by the second. "Retreat!" Callahan shouted, pulling Mark back. "We need to fall back to the entrance." But just as they turned, another sound echoed through the room, this time, from the other side. The cages were beginning to tear open. More mutated creatures, some faster, some larger, were breaking free. "Not enough time," Walker yelled. "We can't hold them off." Callahan knew they were right. The creatures were everywhere now, spilling out of their cages like a wave of nightmare. But they had no choice. They had to fight, or they would die trying. "Form up," Callahan commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We'll make a stand here. If we go down, it'll be together." The group took positions, each member now fully aware of the stakes. The creatures were no longer mindless zombies. They were intelligent, calculating, and relentless. They had evolved, and they were coming for them. Callahan's eyes scanned the room, his mind racing. They were running out of options. But there was one thing he knew: this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about making sure that the rest of the world didn't fall victim to the horrors they had unleashed. "Focus on the biggest one," Callahan ordered. "Take it down first, and maybe we can buy ourselves enough time to make it out." Walker fired again, hitting the massive creature square in the chest. It staggered back, but only for a moment. Then, with a roar of rage, it charged again, faster than ever. "Fall back!" Callahan shouted. "Fall back to the door." They fought their way through the chaos, shooting and swinging, doing everything they could to slow the creatures down. But it was clear that they were losing ground. The creatures were getting closer, their movements too fast, too unpredictable. Then, just as all hope seemed lost, a familiar sound echoed through the room, the whirring of a heavy-duty engine, the sound of reinforcements. Callahan's heart skipped a beat. "Helicopter!" Walker shouted. "It's a military chopper." The chopper descended quickly, its guns blazing. The creatures screeched in fury as they were mowed down by a barrage of gunfire. The chopper hovered above the room, its lights cutting through the darkness. We've got a way out. Callahan yelled, his voice full of both relief and disbelief. The group sprinted for the exit, the chopper providing cover fire as they made their way out. As they climbed into the helicopter, Callahan looked back at the chaos they were leaving behind. The creatures were still there, still hungry, but they were no longer his problem. For now, the survivors had escaped. But the world outside would never be the same. As the chopper ascended, Callahan looked out over the ruined city below. The battle for humanity was far from over. It had only just begun. To be continued.